Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to your Cybersecurity Series. My name is Vlad and I'm here to help you and support you in your cybersecurity journey, even if perhaps you don't have a technical background. Today, this is episode 35 and we are continuing our series on risk management. Building upon the different definitions I gave you in the previous couple of episodes about risks and what it is cyber risks, today we will talk about adopting a risk-based approach. What does it mean and how can we implement that fluently inside an organization? Before we jump in, just a small announcement, and I will pick you right afterwards. All right, small announcement before we begin. There is the Cybersecurity Business Convention, the CBC, happening in Toulouse on the Wednesday 26th and Thursday 27th of November. It's in France. If you are in the area, I would be happy to meet you and connect with you. There is also a vote happening for the different contributors to cybersecurity. There are four different categories: cyber talent, ethical hacker, champion of social networks, and finally cyber contributors. If you are interested in supporting this channel, I would be happy that you can vote for me. I'm on the very last page at the very bottom for the category on the cyber contributors. So if you go and you scroll, you will see me and you will see also other contributors, which I really encourage you to have a look at because those guys contribute heavily through their channels, through their media, and that's it. Now I will go back to the real content on the YouTube channel. Thank you. All right, jumping into the content of the day, adopting a risk-based approach. So starting with why do we need risk management overall? And for that, I will give you a couple of reasons today. Reason number one, cybersecurity, but security in general is something expensive and there is no point in denying it if, or let's say, unless your core business is the development of cybersecurity solutions or security solutions in general, there is a high chance that cybersecurity is just perceived as a support function, which it is. So let's say that you are working for a company that is manufacturing cars. Security has nothing to do with assembling the different pieces together, ordering the spare parts, or even selling the car. So, of course, security is always being going to be perceived as being an additional layer of cost, just perhaps like IT, HR. Yes, those functions are there to enable the business, but more often than not, the top management is going to think that it's an additional cost for them. And there is the cost of the solutions, so the direct cost, so to speak, and then there is the indirect cost, which is not always perceived by the management. But essentially, as soon as you buy a solution, so you are buying for a license, you are buying perhaps a server to deploy a solution on it, then there are the indirect costs, which are about managing or maintaining those solutions in time. So you can think of, for example, implementing an antivirus, but if there is no one or no form of intelligence reviewing the different alerts and taking actions when a malware is spotted, then there is no point in deploying such a security solution. And of course, it's much more about other solutions. So you can think that the more we deploy solution, the more the invoice is piling up and the more security becomes expensive. On top of that, we have a second reason, which is threat actors are no joke. I gave you several examples in this course already. Uh, in 2025, I cannot think of a single week where there was not a major company that got hacked, or that some data was stolen or leaked, or a company that suffered a ransom demand. So those groups are extremely active. And the worst is that they are adapting their techniques, they are changing their modus operandi, which is why we need to sometimes shift the different solutions that we are using or combining different security solutions all together. All of that to say that we need to prioritize because we cannot defend ourselves or defend all the assets across the company in the same way. We need a risk-based approach to determine which level of security are we going to put on which asset. So the security has to be proportional, of course, to the value of the asset or the value that the asset holds. For example, when we talk about data or processes, it has to be in line with the company strategy. So why do we need a risk-based approach? So for me, it's essentially a combination of three things. First, defining what is the risk appetite for the company. So what would you be really ready to lose, or what would be the maximum tolerable loss for your company? So it's a bit like walking into the casino. You have your budget, you know what you can, let's say, lose in general. I mean, you can make money in the casino, but more often than not, you will lose your entire savings. So the idea is, what are you playing with? The difference with a casino is that you are playing it by default. Here in the cyberspace, you can be attacked pretty much anytime. So whether you are a willingly participating player or not, you are in the game. Then it's about implementing a risk framework. So putting all the management functions around risk in general. So the different committees, the different roles and responsibilities, the different processes when managing risks, all of that needs to be structured if you want to be efficient. And finally, once you have put in place this structure, once you know what you can and cannot do, so once you have defined your risk appetite, then you can start assessing risks. And this will be more detailed in the next video. So the idea is that you are going to perform cyber risk assessment on the most critical components of your businesses. So the most critical functions, applications, or elements, you name it. So the idea is that you are going to do some sampling on what really matters for the business. And when talking about risk management framework, I can only recommend that you check out ISO 2705. It's an international standard. It's widely approved and acclaimed. The idea is that it's giving you the main steps to organize within your company to manage risks. And it's applied, of course, to cybersecurity, but not only. It could be really general. The idea is that as inputs, first, you need the asset inventories, the business requirements, security requirements as well, and also an understanding of the scope of what you are trying to study. Then there is this first step of context establishment, which is about collecting all of those information and understanding where are we going to perform a risk assessment. You can see that the risk assessment is actually composed only of the three boxes right in the middle: identifying the risks, making an estimation of those risks in terms of likelihood, so probability of occurrence, and impact. So that's really the risk evaluation. At some point, we need to make a decision whether or not our assessment is satisfactory. If not, of course, we will review some of the hypotheses as part of the context establishment. But if yes, then we need to put in place a risk treatment plan. Those risk treatment plan can really differ in terms of techniques. The idea is that you can reduce the risk. We will talk about mitigations. You can accept the risks. You can transfer the risk perhaps to an insurance company, or you can really cancel the risk and say, well, I am actually canceling this business activity. This option is really not often used, but you could say, well, perhaps we are not moving to the cloud with this solution because we do not accept the risk associated with it. Or perhaps we are not going to subcontract this piece of development because there are too many risks associated with it. So that's an example of how you would cancel the risks by canceling the business activity. And once you have defined the treatment plan, it's about accepting the resulting risks, because even if you reduce the risk to a certain level, at some point there might be some residual risks that you need to accept or at least be aware of. And you can see that it's not only this workflow, it's also about two other steps on the sides: the risk monitoring and review and the risk communication. So you need to make sure that the right instances within your company, perhaps the top management or the executive committee, need to be aware of some of the risks. So for an executive committee, obviously, you would only communicate on the most critical risks, on the most critical assets. But the risk monitoring in review really applies to all of them, including the risks that you have accepted. So you need to make sure that the hypotheses taken at the beginning or the threat landscape have not evolved. So maybe some of the risks were low, but due to new techniques or new developments, it might need to be reassessed. So that's really how, or at least the main principles about establishing a risk management framework. Of course, in practice, then it's different in each of the company because it requires having a profound understanding of the roles and responsibilities of each of the teams. Once you do that, you need to adopt an approach based on the risks. And I really want to stress this really last slide of the day: the difference between compliance and risk management. When you are talking about compliance, you are taking a standard or a law, a directive, essentially a set of external requirements, and you are ticking boxes. So you are making sure that you have everything in place in order to comply with this external requirement. The idea is that often the scope is really limited and it's only a regulatory constraints or legal constraints or sometimes contractual obligations, because some clauses can also be added into contracts, and that's valid for cybersecurity as well. The idea is that this approach, while yes, it's working, is essentially prescriptive, meaning that it's only based on frameworks or specific rules that you need to follow. And we need a more proactive approach. We need really to think of risk management as focusing on the potential risk scenarios and putting ourselves into the mind of a threat actor. So, typically, in our case, when we talk about cyber, it can be an insider, but it can also be an external hacker. The idea is that our scope is really going to be broader, meaning that we are not going to look only at specific rules that we're going to tick the box on, but we are going to think what's the worst that could happen? What could they really achieve from an attacker perspective? And it's going to encompass all enterprise wide risks. So, of course, we are going to look at the disruption of operations, financial losses. So, you can see it's not only looking at finance, it's looking at finance, operations, legal, HR, all of the associated risks when it comes to cybersecurity, because again, cyber is really transverse. So when you have a data leak, it can affect and trigger all of the functions across a company. In the next episode, we will talk about EBIOS Risk Manager, which is one method that you can apply to identify cybersecurity risk, identify and assess. So that was it for the difference between compliance and risk. I hope it's clear. You have the main talking points here on the slide, but essentially moving from just a ticking the box experience into defining practical scenarios. But again, I will give you examples. See you soon in the next episode. I hope you enjoyed. Don't hesitate to reach out in the comments as always, and see you soon.